London is blacked out. Windows are taped. The distant thud of bombs has become as routine as the sound of traffic. Families sleep underground in shelters. Everyone is exhausted, but nobody is giving up. And then, on one quiet morning in March 1944, inside a hidden corner of the city, a British man is walked into an execution chamber. No crowd gathers, no journalists wait outside, no radio announcements break the news. The government does not want the public to know that this man, born in London, has been condemned as a traitor for secretly serving Nazi Germany. This is the story of Oswald John Job, the aging British spy whose execution was kept off the front pages and out of the public eye. If you want more real, unfiltered stories about World War II, spies, betrayals, secret trials, hit subscribe to Timeless Wold right now, turn on the bell, and help keep these hidden chapters of history alive. This channel brings you the parts of the past that textbooks skip. Let's go back to the beginning of the man Britain decided to quietly hang. From East End childhood to petty criminal. Oswald John Job was born on July 4, 1885, in the East End of London. This wasn't the polished, tourist-friendly part of the city. It was crowded, poor, and unforgiving. Life there forced people to grow up fast. By the age of 11, Job had already left school to work in a bakehouse. No teenage years, no real education, just hard labor and long hours. That early exit from school set him on a path where rules and boundaries would always be flexible. In 1906, he married a domestic servant and later became a father. For a short time, his life looked ordinary. Too little money, but a wife, a child, and a job. It could have stayed that way. But Job had a different instinct: crime. Soon after his daughter was born, he got involved in a gem theft and ended up in prison. That first serious offense marked him as more than just another poor Londoner. He was now a convicted criminal with a record and, as history would show, someone willing to cut corners and betray trust. When he got out, instead of rebuilding his life at home, he slipped away to start over somewhere else. He chose Paris. Reinventing himself in Paris. In France, Job tried to rebrand himself. He later claimed that during World War I, he had volunteered for the French Foreign Legion, but that they turned him down. Whether that story is completely true or just another performance, it bought him a certain image, the man who wanted to fight but was rejected. His personal life was just as messy as his past. While still married in Britain, he married again, this time to a French woman. That made him a bigamist in legal terms, but he didn't seem bothered by that. Job worked as a shop fitter, then trained as an optician, specializing in artificial eyes. His business grew. For a while, he looked like a small success story, a former London street kid turned Paris tradesman. Then his French wife contracted tuberculosis and had to go away for treatment. Separated from her, Job became obsessed with the idea that she might be unfaithful. He started watching her, checking on her, keeping track of where she went and who she saw. That personal jealousy gave him his first real taste of surveillance. He wasn't spying for a government yet, but he was training himself to monitor people, track movements, and feed his paranoia with secret observation. Those skills would later be repurposed for something much larger and far more dangerous. The Nazi occupation changes everything. In 1940, the German army stormed into France. Paris fell. Overnight, the City of Lights became a city of fear and occupation. German soldiers patrolled the streets, flags changed, and the sense of safety vanished. Job ended up in German hands. Accounts place him in places like Fresnes prison and later in the Drancy transit camp near Paris, a place the Germans used as a holding site before deporting Jews and others to concentration and extermination camps. Here, his ability to speak German made him useful to his captors. Guards began relying on him to pass orders, translate, and communicate with prisoners. That gave him a slightly privileged position, but it also made him deeply unpopular. To many fellow prisoners, he was already edging toward the role of collaborator. At some point, Job faced a choice: suffer as a prisoner or cooperate and hope for better treatment. He chose cooperation. The shadow of John Amory.
Job was not the only British subject drifting into treason in German hands. Another figure moving through this world was John Amory, an openly pro-Nazi American fascist who wanted to recruit British volunteers to fight for Hitler. Amory's idea was to create a unit called the Legion of St. George, British men in German uniform fighting mostly on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union. To find volunteers, he visited prisoner of war and internment camps trying to talk captured British subjects into switching sides. Some accounts mention that Amory came into contact with British internees in the same environment as Job. One later claimed that Job was indeed recruited into Amory's orbit, or at least drawn into German service around this time. Job would later deny meeting Amory, but by then his credibility was so damaged that nothing he said could be taken at face value. What's clear is this. During his time under German control, Oswald John Job agreed to cooperate with the enemy. And Germany saw a use for him. Too old for the front, perfect for espionage. By the time World War II was raging across Europe, Job was nearly 60. Nobody was going to hand him a rifle and send him charging across a battlefield. But espionage did not require youth. It required nerve, language skills, and a willingness to deceive. Job had all three. He was the ideal candidate for a risky assignment: return to Britain under a cover story, blend into civilian life, and report back to the Germans. The Germans needed agents on the ground in England. They wanted information on military targets, on morale, on the accuracy of their air raids, and, later, on the impact of new weapons like the V-1 flying bombs. Job agreed to act as their spy. In exchange, he got out of the camp and out from under the constant threat of being treated like other prisoners. To him, this was probably a life-saving deal. To Britain, it was treachery in the making. The escape story. Job did not sneak into Britain in a rubber dinghy at night or drop from the sky by parachute. Instead, he traveled in a way that appeared official and legitimate. He arrived by flying boat as part of a repatriation process. His cover story was dramatic and designed to win sympathy. He claimed he had escaped from German captivity, making his way across occupied territory, traveling by train and on foot, then crossing through Spain and Portugal before finally reaching British authorities. Stories like that weren't impossible. Some men did escape, but British intelligence had learned to be suspicious of miracle stories, especially when they came from people returning from Nazi-controlled territory. MI5 was already running a complex web of double agents. One of them, codenamed Dragonfly, received a message from German handlers. A courier would soon arrive in Britain carrying a diamond ring and a jeweled tie pen. This courier would bring money and make contact. Armed with that information, security forces at the port of Poole on England's south coast were told to keep a close eye out for a man with those distinctive items. And then, Oswald John Job stepped off a flying boat, wearing a jeweled tie pen. Watched from the moment he landed. From his first moments back in Britain, Job was under surveillance. On paper, he was a brave escapee from German captivity. In reality, he was the man MI5 suspected of being the courier sent by Nazi intelligence. Job traveled to London and stayed with his brother, trying to slip
back into civilian life and keep his head down. Outwardly, he appeared calm and reserved. Inwardly, he must have suspected something was wrong because he later noticed someone tailing him. One day, after stepping off a bus in the city, he realized he was being followed. Instead of pretending not to see it, he confronted the man tracking him. That was the end of his short-lived freedom. He was arrested and taken into custody. Camp 020, the interrogation. After his arrest, Job was moved to Camp 020, a secret MI5 interrogation facility near London. This is where British intelligence officers questioned captured spies, enemy agents, and suspected traitors. At first, Job stuck to his story. He claimed he had pulled off an incredible escape from German custody, that he had fought to get back to Britain, and that he was no friend of the Nazis. The problem was that his story didn't match the intelligence they already had. They knew about the jeweled tie pin and the diamond ring. They knew about the warning sent to Dragonfly. They knew how the Germans operated, and Job fit the pattern perfectly. Under sustained interrogation, his lies began to crumble.
The officers at Camp 020 were experienced. They had broken more sophisticated spies than him. Eventually, Job confessed that he had agreed to work for the Germans. Realizing how serious his situation was, he tried one last strategy to save himself. He offered to work for the British instead. He promised to take on dangerous missions, to act as a double agent, to do whatever they wanted if they would spare his life. But by now, his reputation was destroyed. Inside Camp 020, other prisoners disliked and distrusted him. Officers came to believe that Job was only honest when he was under intense pressure, and even then, only half the time. In the eyes of the British state, he was not an asset, he was a liability. So they chose not to use him. They chose to prosecute him. The Treachery Act and a death sentence. Job was put on trial at the Old Bailey, London's most famous criminal court. During wartime, the British government had passed the Treachery Act of 1940, designed specifically to deal with people like him. The law was clear and unforgiving. If a person, with intent to help the enemy, did anything likely to assist enemy military, hinder British forces, or endanger life, that person was guilty of treachery and could be sentenced only one way: death. The prosecution laid out the case: his suspicious return, the clues from German intelligence, his own confession under interrogation, and the nature of his mission. The jury found him guilty. Oswald John Job was condemned to die as a traitor to the crown. Waiting for the end. Following his conviction, he was sent to Wormwood Scrubs prison in London to await execution. Faced with the reality of the gallows, he tried to escape his fate in the only way left. He attempted suicide. Using a blackout curtain, he twisted a makeshift noose, hoping to end his own life before the state could do it for him. Guards discovered his attempt and stopped it. He would not be allowed to decide how or when he died. Days later, he was transferred to Pentonville prison, a facility with a long history of carrying out executions. There, the preparations began for his final morning. The hangman, Albert Pierpoint. The man responsible for carrying out Job's sentence was Albert Pierpoint, one of Britain's most experienced executioners. Pierpoint treated his grim work like a technical profession. His goal was speed and precision. In the days before the execution, he met Job briefly and took the measurements he needed: height, weight, and build. Using these numbers, he calculated the length of the drop required to break Job's neck instantly using the long drop method. On March 17, 1944, Job's final day arrived. He was taken from his condemned cell into the execution chamber, a stark room dominated by a trapdoor platform. Everything was already prepared. A chalk X marked the exact point where he was to stand. After confirming his identity, the prison officers positioned him on the trap. A black hood was pulled over his head. Pierpoint placed the noose around his neck, adjusted the knot carefully, and stepped back. There were no cameras, no public witnesses, just a small group of officials and an executioner who had done this many times before. Pierpoint pulled the lever. The trap opened, Job dropped. His neck snapped. Oswald John Job was dead. A secret execution in a city under fire. Unlike some high-profile executions, Job's death was not announced publicly at once. The government worried that revealing the presence of enemy spies and British traitors operating inside the country could damage morale. London was still under threat. V-bombs and air raids continued to terrorize the population. People were already living under fear and stress. Learning that one of their own had been working for the enemy from within might have pushed public trust too far. So his execution was kept quiet. Only later was his case discussed more openly, and only then did people begin to see how close his actions might have come to helping Germany refine his attacks. What he might have done. In the months after Job's death, the Germans began launching V-1 flying bombs at Britain, primitive cruise missiles aimed mainly at London. These weapons caused huge destruction and fear. Intelligence later suggested that Job's mission may have been to report on the accuracy and impact of those attacks. If he had been free in London during the V1 campaign, he could have sent back detailed reports: where they landed, how much damage they caused, whether they were hitting military or civilian areas. With that information, the Germans could have adjusted their targeting, improved their aim, and potentially killed many more people. Even one spy, properly placed, can multiply the effectiveness of a weapon. Job might not have pulled any trigger or dropped any bomb himself, but his information could have made each one more deadly. A letter associated with him shows where his loyalty had shifted. In it, he reportedly wrote, "Since I have always considered Germany my fatherland, I would also like to do my bit in the decisive struggle in the ranks of the German people." For a man born in London, that was the final betrayal. He no longer saw Britain as his country at all. A forgotten traitor. Oswald John Job was not a general, a famous politician, or a frontline soldier. He was a small-time criminal who let opportunity, fear, and self-interest pull him into outright treason. But his story shows how dangerous even one corruptible person can be in a total war. He was willing to bomb the city that raised him for a regime that saw him as disposable. His execution was quiet, but the message behind it was loud. In wartime, betrayal from within is not just a crime, it is a death sentence. If you want more true stories like this, about traitors, spies, and hidden operations from World War II, make sure you subscribe to Timeless World right now. Tap the bell so you don't miss the next episode, and share this video with someone who loves real history, not the sanitized one. Most people have never heard of Oswald John Job, the old British traitor whose work might have helped guide Nazi terror weapons onto London.